Welcome back to the show. We are very happy to have a first-time guest, at least on our radio show. Steve Wyche of the NFL Network is here with us. You can check out Steve on the NFL Network, of course. He's their chief national reporter. You can also check out the NFL Report with James Palmer, which airs every Thursday at 6:15 p.m. Central Time on the NFL channel. You can also get it on the NFL app. Steve, thank you for taking some time. Where are you today?
Well, Buck, I'm actually in Honolulu, believe it or not. The NFL Network, we broadcast the Polynesian Bowl, which is the top high school all-star game in the country. A lot of guys who played in this game, Tua Tagovailoa, Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, just tons of guys who are already in the NFL or about to be in the NFL have played in this game. So not a bad gig to have heading into the divisional playoff round.
Yeah, from L.A. to Honolulu, Steve. My heart breaks for you as we sit here in negative 2-degree weather in Nashville, which we are just thoroughly unequipped for. But we're not here to talk about weather with Steve. We're here to talk about football. And the reason that we asked Steve on is because your background, just for the audience, Steve, not that you need to list your credentials. People who've been watching the sport and watching the NFL Network know you for a very, very long time. But your background leading up to the national platform that you have now, before we get into this conversation about Titans general manager Ran Carthon.
Yeah, I mean, I was a long-time newspaper guy. Covered the NFL for a few years in Miami with the Miami Herald. I went to Washington to cover the NBA, but in coming back to the NFL in Atlanta, I covered the Falcons for several years before moving on to the NFL Network. And in Atlanta, back when I covered the team from 05 to 08, is where I originally met Ran Carthon when he was a scout for the team.
And so when you as a beat writer, the job is so much different than anything else. I think people really underestimate. They value the information, of course, and that's the job of the beat writer, to provide as much information, as much context about the circumstances for the team. But the granular level of reporting that you're doing and all the different people that you're getting to know throughout the course of that process, this was far before Ran Carthon, general manager, far before Ran Carthon, director of player personnel in San Francisco. This is one of his first gigs in the NFL after having played, and of course coming up from a family who is very familiar with the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and look, as a job of a beat writer, if you're a good one, you find people like Ran Carthon, who's one of many scouts for a team, to see if they can give you context on upcoming prospects, to see if a guy that they pounded the table for is materializing. I mean, this is what you do. You know, and Ran back then with Atlanta, he was a scout, and I have seen him, progress to, the Rams, where he would be the head of college scouting, then the head of pro scouting. And there's so many different levels to it, because when you're scouting college players, yes, it is what it is. But then you're director of college scouting, you're not just looking at, guys you may draft now, but guys who, okay, in 3 years, this guy may become a free agent. We really liked him then. How does he fit into this coaching staff and what we're trying to do? So you've got all that. And then the pro scouting, of course, is, the free agents and really working it. And it's been amazing, watching Ran come from, a 20-something-year-old and just this guy who has had this insatiable hunger and still does. I mean, none of that has ever gone away. I think that's a remarkable trait of his, to find certain types of guys. And I will say this in terms of players. He has got a knack. And there's certain guys in the league that have it. Alonzo Highsmith, who used to have it. John Dorsey, the former general manager of the Browns and the Chiefs. They don't just find good football players. They find, what NFL folks will talk as dudes, like guys who just love the game, who will do whatever, who will protect their teammates at all costs. They just have that sixth sense about them to find guys who are going to be strong and potentially dominant players for years.
Steve Wyche of the NFL Network is here with us on 104.5 The Zone. At Wyche89 is where you can follow him. Of course, you can check him out on the NFL Network and the NFL Report that he hosts weekly. It's such the background and kind of his skill set, Carthon's, Steve, is something that I want to try and get across to Titans fans because they just know so little about him here. He's not been overwhelmingly available. His predecessor, John Robinson, met with the media, it felt like on a monthly basis. That's very uncommon among general managers anyway, and a lot of times John was having to get in front of us to talk about decisions that were made, mistakes that were made as far as personnel went, and obviously he's no longer here. But Ran, the only time that fans have heard from him are at the opening of training camp this year and on the day that they fired Mike Vrabel, or announced the firing of Mike Vrabel, of which Ran was not a part of. So to try and give context to the audience about his skill set and the person that you saw in Atlanta to the person that you've seen rise through the ranks of various NFL organizations to become one of 32 general managers, where specifically did he stand out as you were getting to know him and as he was helping you understand more about, at the time, the Falcons' direction?
Well, I've known Ran even when he left Atlanta to go to the St. Louis Rams, then the Los Angeles Rams, and then the 49ers. We've always had a very good relationship. And the one thing that has been a constant is he's someone who is aware of what he doesn't know. And he will rely on, and this is where I think he's going to be great during this coaching search, he will rely on very astute people to help him. He is one of the best relationship builders in the NFL in that realm in terms of the personnel department. He's got Les Snead, the general manager of the Rams, Ray Agnew and Brad Holmes, who he worked with the Rams. Holmes is now the GM of the Lions. Agnew's the assistant GM. Adam Peters with the Niners, of course, who's now the general manager with the Commanders. John Lynch, the general manager. These are all of these guys have different ways that they approach things. Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew are the football guys. Les Snead's an analytics guy. Adam Peters is kind of a CEO type, as is John Lynch. And I think that's where he's merging a lot of this. And him not being available, I think, is very strategic and very right, because this is Mike Vrabel's team. He is being interjected into a foundation that was already established. So, the head coach is the one voice. That's how it should be. He shouldn't, come in and try and make himself available and Bigfoot anybody who's been here before him. So I think that was, well designed by whomever came up with that strategy. But again, in terms of what he does, he doesn't just, we in the media and we as fans like to say, wow, this guy was a great college player, or this guy was an excellent coach here. He has, again, that antenna from learning from the right people, of finding the right people to put in the building who meet the existing roster, or the roster that they want to have, or the culture that they want to have. And that is hugely important, because you can put a great player into a roster that is aging and he's not going to thrive, or to a roster that is too young and there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. You've got to be able to find the right fit for all of that. He's been part of organizations clearly that have done that successfully and sustaining it for years. But again, also, he's one of these guys, man. He's got a DNA in him. As a player, he had to fight to stay in the league for a couple of years, to kind of step out of his father, Mo Carthon's shadow, the great running back for the Giants. He had to fight to step out of that shadow. And he seems to always have that kind of Rocky mentality that I've got to fight to overcome no matter what.
Are you surprised then, and I understand the nature of the reporting is borne out that it was more about a devolving of the relationship between the owner here, the controlling owner here, Amy Adams Strunk, and Mike Vrabel, that led to his ouster. But Ran, when he spoke to us about Vrabel, said that they were in lockstep the entire way. Ran trying to make it work around Vrabel in the way that you've described, and that it ultimately wasn't successful. Are you surprised by that?
No. I mean, look, Ran has always told me in my conversations with him, it's like, hey, me and Mike Vrabel might not be best friends, but we have worked very well together. Like he's, even after the fact, he's like, there's been no problems with Mike Vrabel. Like anyone who's trying to say that it was an issue between him and Vrabel, at least from Rand's perspective, there was no issue there. They worked fine. So some of the reporting and some of the things I've seen, it does seem more like an ownership decision, because it sounds like this was made without Rand's input. And so I never sensed there was friction between those two. Now, they might not have walked around the facility together, but they worked well together. And that's very, very common in a lot of NFL buildings where there is kind of a separation of church and state between head coach and general manager.
Steve Wyche of the NFL Network is our guest here on 104.5 The Zone. He's in Honolulu covering the Polynesia Bowl, which you can see on the NFL Network, as well as his show, the NFL Report, with James Palmer, one of their great insiders there as well. So with that, the evolution of who the Tennessee Titans want to be, and Ran being a part of the driving force there. We know that Amy and ownership are ultimately going to make their decision about the direction that she wants the franchise to go, but obviously Rand's role in relationship building and the collaboration keyword or buzzword that we continue to hear around here and across the league, frankly. What kind of direction is the league evolving in, Steve, that you think Ran is going to kind of lean into having a little bit more say in how this goes?
Well, first off, Rand's not going to be one of these guys who's going to make the cronyism hire. Well, I worked with this guy here. This is my guy. I'm going to bring him in. He is going to bring in a coach who he thinks he's going to look at the division, right? He's going to look at the talent in the division, see how great these young quarterbacks are, and how all of them seem to be potentially dominant teams for the next 10 years. Okay, so he's going to look at that first. And then he's going to look to see, okay, hey, who are we going to bring back? Are we bringing back Derek? Are we bringing back Tannehill? Are we going to go with a complete kind of young roster? And if that's so, let's find a coach who is a program developer and tone setter, even if it's a first-time guy, as opposed to somebody who's established whose expectation might be to win right away with a young roster. So he will take all of those factors into account, which some teams don't do, right? Some teams just want the big splash because the coach has had success somewhere or has designed a great offense. And so that's why, again, I think that, I see the amount of candidates they've already requested interviews for. This is going to be a thorough search. There's going to be no rush. But again, the first thing he's got to do is sit with Amy or whomever and decide what type of roster they want to have next year, how patient they're going to be, what expectations are, and then they're going to find the best leader, not necessarily a specific side of the ball strategist to guide this team.
When you mention that as the process, Steve, immediately Dan Campbell comes to mind because they didn't have success in Detroit right away, and it seemed that they. I mean, what was Jared Goff's losing streak to start his Lions career? It was something like 0-5 or something terrible. Anyway,
longer than that, yeah.
Really, really bad. And now you've seen the fruits of all that labor and a build that took them a couple years to get there. That seems to take I don't want to say a unique understanding from all levels of the organization, but one that I feel is less common than what the Lions have been able to create and what others have tried to create. Losing wears on people.
Well, look where Ran's coming from. Okay, he has a Rams team that was big on flashy skill players and kind of grunt offensive linemen and a dominant defensive line. Then he goes to San Francisco. Dominant defensive fronts, very strong interior, flashy skill players. As I talked about, he came up with Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew with the Rams, who are now leading the Detroit Lions.
Right.
Dominant offensive line, getting there on the defensive front, flashy skill players. So in all of those teams, though, succeeded by starting with the interior. You heard me talk earlier about how Ran finds dudes, right? He's been around guys who've gotten the Aaron Donalds, who've gone out and acquired the Trent Williams, who've helped draft the Nick Bosa's and, studs on the inside like that, the Eric Armsteads. So I would expect, when it comes to roster building, when it comes to patience, you say, okay, we've got Will Levis. Let's rock with him. Let's go get him some offensive linemen, and let's go get some guys who could hunt C.J. Stroud and Anthony Robinson and Trevor Lawrence. I would think those would probably be the priorities in setting this team forward.
Steve, around the league, when you look at the current carousel and arguably the two most qualified candidates as far as resume in Harbaugh and Belichick, having gotten, in many cases, the least amount of interviews, Belichick just in Atlanta, Harbaugh in L.A. and Atlanta, has that surprised you at all that there seems to be some sort of hesitancy to jump at even sitting down with these two guys?
I don't think this was a surprise. I mean, I think, you talked about the credentials of Bill Belichick, but then you look at the trend of coaching. Bill Belichick's in his 70s. He's coached a certain way. He's established that Patriot way, which is not the way most teams – I mean, you look at these playoff teams, there's not one Patriot way element to it. This is more the Shanahan, McVay, Andy Reid way. I mean, almost all the coaches head coaches in the playoffs left have touched one of those three trees. And so no surprise with Belichick. Again, this is where you have to look at the fit. Atlanta has interviewed Bill Belichick. Well, maybe they say, we've got all the pieces here but a quarterback. Let's get him here to wrap his arms around the building, around an owner who's in his 80s who wants to see if he can win right away. Whereas with Harbaugh, see, that's the type of coach, who's a program builder. Going back to when he started, University of San Diego put him on the map. One at Stanford, one with the Niners when they were in the toilet, and then goes to Michigan and builds him into a national champion. So, and he doesn't need. He's done that without your prototypical superstar quarterback. So, I think there'll be a slow. He's starting. It seems like he's starting to get a couple more interviews. He's interviewed with the Chargers, the Falcons. I think there's one more team, the Raiders. I'm not sure. But there's really no surprise. Ben Johnson with the Lions is going to be the hottest coaching candidate out there, as he should be. He's earned his stripes, and as have some of the other coaches being interviewed, the Raheem Morrises of the world. And what you're seeing more and more teams do is look at the DeMeco Ryans and Dan Campbell model. We don't need an offensive quarterback whisperer. We need a leader of men that kind of fits the plan for our type of roster, to hire a right staff, to establish a culture, and then move forward in adding players.
Steve, you've spent entirely too much of your afternoon, or I guess it's your morning there, while in Honolulu talking to a Nashville sports talk radio show, but we do greatly appreciate the context and the information. Enjoy the Polynesia Bowl, and we'll look forward to bothering you again, hopefully when you're, in a less scenic setting.
Well, please do, Buck. It's been great, and thanks for having me on to have this conversation.
That's Steve Wyche of the NFL Network, at Wyche89. You can check him out on the NFL Network, of course, and the co-host of the NFL Report that airs on the NFL Network, and you can find it on the NFL app. Really, really good context there from Steve about how Ran Carthon has come up through this process and basically how that's going to inform his coaching search as a party to Amy Adams-Strunk in this. Good information to have. We'll wrap up the show. Coming up next, I'm Buck Reising. It's 104.5 The Zone.